Well, hey everybody, it's Mr. Schauber, and welcome to our presentation on college football. This is the first of four presentations on college football, and as we get going, college football is absolutely one of the most popular sports in the United States and has been for many years. College presents a different aspect than pros, and I think a lot of people like college football better than the pros. Um, College has it just seems like it has so much excitement, and there's so much pageantry and tradition with the bands and the cheerleaders and the student sections and uh, the legendary coaches and uh, the classic look of the uniforms, the traditional uniforms. Of course, nowadays a lot of teams have multiple uniforms, but the classic look of Penn State and Alabama and Notre Dame and schools like that, Ohio State, and in Michigan. So there's so much history to college football. Of course, you got to remember, college football was around before pro football was, right? There were no pros uh, in the old days at first, and it was only after college had been going for a while that pro football leagues started. So as we look at college football, its beginnings and some of its greatest quarterbacks, uh, you got to keep in mind the game has evolved just like all sports evolve. College football in its infancy and for many years thereafter was mainly a running game. You didn't pass the ball too much. Nowadays, you could pass 40 or 50 or 60 times in a game. Uh, in the early days of college football, it wasn't like that. It was mostly a running game, and the games were generally more low scoring. Generally, of course, sometimes you had lopsided big mismatches. But it was mostly a running game, and that's just how things were. So, uh, things have changed, but you'll see, of course, the early quarterbacks, their stats aren't nearly what the later, more recent quarterbacks are, and that's because of the evolution of the game. But anyway, let's get started. Some of the successful programs by decade. You can see some of them have stayed the same, some of them are different. But in the earliest days, it was the Ivy League. That's where college football really started. It kind of was the Ivy League, and then the Midwest. Michigan became kind of the first powerhouse west of the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, but then in the 1910s, you still stayed with Ivy League, but then Army and Pitt and Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, Penn State. Of course, during the World War II times, actually, Army was a dominant team. Michigan stayed great, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama. And then once you get into the 50s and the 60s, your Oklahoma, Tennessee, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, Michigan State, some of those teams, become dominant or stay dominant. In the 70s, Nebraska was awesome. Notre Dame, Alabama, USC. Okay, USC had kind of made a name for itself in the 60s and has been that way ever since. In the 80s, Nebraska stayed fantastic. University of Miami gets on the map and becomes a dominant program. BYU comes into its own, wins a national championship. Uh, of course, Oklahoma, Michigan, Notre Dame. And you can just see down through, right, all these teams. Now, some of these teams are kind of upstarts, in a given decade and had maybe a few years of glory. Some of them have been good for, like I say, for decades. So, anyway, uh, there is there are some of your college football powerhouses throughout the decades, but of course I've left probably a few schools off here and there, and uh, and you might be looking at some of these traditional powerhouses that aren't really that great right now, and that happens too. College football is so much about recruiting, and you got these kids for 3 or 4 or 5 years. If they redshirt, they could be there for 5 years, but playing wise, 3 4 years, and they're gone, right? And so one good recruiting class can really make you good for a few years, and then if you have a couple of bad recruiting classes, you might not be very good for a handful of years. So it's so dependent on coaching staffs to recruit well and for players to obviously produce on the field. All right, let's look at some quarterbacks. Of course, the quarterback position is probably the most important position on a football field. The quarterback is your general. The quarterback Playing quarterback successfully, that's probably the hardest position in sports to play successfully because you have to process so much information in such a short amount of time. You have to be accurate in your throwing. You have to anticipate. You have to be able to read defenses before the snap. And so quarterbacks are asked to do a lot. Now, they're probably asked to do more in the pros as far as you have to be smarter. You have to be able to read defenses better. You have to be able to process information quicker in the pros. But college is you still got to do it pretty quick. Um, and and so you got to just keep in mind these are some of the greatest college quarterbacks we've ever seen that we'll be looking at here. We'll start off with Sammy Baugh. We'll kind of go chronologically. Sammy Baugh is probably the first great uh, passer in college football history. He played at TCU. Of course, back then, most players played on both sides of the ball. Your best players, would play quarterback, running back, and then they'd also play, linebacker, defensive back, and then oftentimes they were the kickers as well, punter, kicker, things like that. So Sammy Baugh was big for his era at 6'2", slinging Sammy, two-time All-American, and back then there were hardly any bowl games. They had a few, but he beat LSU in the 1936 Sugar Bowl. He was also the MVP of the first Cotton Bowl ever played, which was his last year at TCU. Beat Marquette on New Year's Day in 37. It was the 36th season, but beat him on New Year's Day in 1937. You can see his career stats. You're like, wait a minute, guys do that in, you know, quarterbacks nowadays do that in a season or less, right? And yeah, that's true. But again, it was mostly a running game. His passing, as limited as we would consider it, as limited as it was way ahead of its time. So over 3,300 passing yards, 39 touchdowns. He also played baseball at TCU, and he would go on to have a tremendous pro career as well. The Golden Boy, Paul Hornung, Notre Dame, quarterback, running back, safety, kicker, kick returner, also big for his era, even in the 50s, being 6'2", 205 as a quarterback, running back would have been very big. Played basketball at Notre Dame as well. He was a versatile athlete, one of the great athletes in Notre Dame history. He won the Heisman Trophy in 1956. He's the only player from a losing team to win the Heisman Trophy. Notre Dame usually was really good. They had a down year in '56, but he still won the Heisman. That's how good he was. The Heisman Trophy is given to the player voted the best college player for that year in all the country. So it's the highest award you can win in college football. Very prestigious. One person wins it per year. They make two Heismans every year. They give one to the athlete and they give one to the school to put in the trophy case. So uh, you can see his career stats as far as his passing went. He also, like I said, he also split time as a running back, was a prolific running back as well. Mostly played running back in the pros when he went to the Green Bay Packers. The Paul Hornung Award is given to the most versatile college football player in the nation every year. And he was this is really cool. Toward the bottom of the page, you see he was the first in pro football history, when he finally got to the pros, to have won the Heisman, been the number one overall pick in the draft, NFL draft, won the NFL MVP, and been inducted to the Pro and College Football Halls of Fame. First player in history to do that. That's pretty select company, right? Pretty awesome to be able to do that. So that is Paul Hornung, the Golden Boy. Roger Staubach, Roger the Dodger. I played at the Naval Academy, 6'2", 190, one of the great quarterbacks of his era, maybe the greatest of his era. First team All-American in 1963 and won the Heisman Trophy that year as well in 1963. College football, like college basketball, also has other Players of the Year awards that you can get for your position or even overall. But the Heisman's the most prestigious. But like the Maxwell Award is given to the best quarterback, voted on to be the best quarterback and things like that. So he won the Maxwell Award in '63. He was the College Player of the Year, the UPI College Player of the Year that year. You can see he won all the awards, right? The Walter Camp Memorial Trophy given to the player voted the best in the country. So anyway, that year he led Navy to a 9-1 record #2 national ranking. They went to the national championship game, lost to Texas, but Navy was in the national title game because of him. He was way ahead of his time, one of the great uh, running and passing quarterbacks. He was mobile, dual threat, and kind of one of the first ones to be that way. And just an awesome player. You can see his jersey is retired by the Naval Academy. And after graduation from the Navy, he did a tour of duty in Vietnam. He still owed the Naval Academy some time before he could go to the pros. And the Dallas Cowboys eventually drafted him, but knowing that he couldn't play for them for a while, and they were okay with that because he was such a unique talent. Once he got to the pros, he had a tremendous Hall of Fame pro career there with the Cowboys, and is one of the great quarterbacks ever, pro and college. Archie Manning. Archie Manning is Peyton and Eli Manning's dad. And before they were stars, Archie was a star, a superstar at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. A big kid, 6'3", 212 pounds. He started at quarterback for 3 years at Ole Miss, which was pretty much unheard of back then. Uh, you did not start usually more than 2 years. To start 3 years was fantastic. So you usually rode the pine your freshman year and sophomore year. If you were really good, they'd put you somewhere else as a sophomore, some other position. But uh, he played all 3 years that he, started all 3 years that he from sophomore on. He was played in the first national primetime broadcast of a college football game. Now, every college football game is on TV. Didn't used to be that way. And the first, primetime broadcast in the evening, they played a game with starring Old Miss and Archie Manning because he was such a draw. And he threw for 436 yards, 3 touchdowns, and ran for 104 yards in that game. That was his coming out party, right? He was just awesome. He was also a dual threat quarterback, like Roger Staubach had been. Okay, and you can see his career stats there. All SEC in 1969 and 70, the SEC Player of the Year in 69. In 1969, he kind of won a bunch of awards, right? Walter Camp, Mississippi Sportsman of the Year. His number 18 jersey is retired by Ole Miss, and like I said, he is the father of Peyton and Eli. Archie, having gone to Ole Miss, it was interesting because, and we'll talk about this, I guess, in a little bit with Peyton, but it was just assumed that his sons would go to Ole Miss as well, and Peyton kind of surprised everybody when he decided to go to Tennessee. Eli went to Ole Miss, and that kind of saved him. But the Ole Miss fans were really mad at Peyton Manning for not going there, and so when Eli went there, he kind of they forgave the Mannings a little bit, I guess. But Archie would go on to have a really good pro career. Unfortunately for him, he was on some really bad teams in the pros, mainly the New Orleans Saints, and they were really bad back then when he played for them in the 70s. But so he was usually running for his life, during games, but he was really good and he was worth the price of admission. Jim McMahon was not the first great BYU quarterback, but he was the best BYU had seen up to that point. BYU had become a pass-happy offense, kind of ahead of most other schools. Lavelle Edwards and his coaching staff really kind of latched on to the passing game, and back in the 70s, and they were ahead of their time. And so their quarterbacks just put up huge numbers, and they were a high scoring team because they were throwing the ball down the field and scoring touchdowns quickly. Uh, McMahon was a 2-time first team All American as a junior and a senior. He played all 4 years, but he was the punter for the team in 1977 as a freshman and in some of the 78 season as a sophomore. He was all conference as a sophomore, and he was an honorable mention All-American as a sophomore. So he played punter and some quarterback. But his junior year, he took over as full-time quarterback, 2-time All-American. He was in his senior year, he won the Davey O'Brien Award and the Sammy Baugh Award for best quarterback. He was twice the Holiday Bowl MVP junior and senior year. led BYU to back-to-back conference championships, junior and senior year. And while he was as a junior, he set 32 NCAA records, including passing yards, total offense, touchdown passes, and quarterback rating. He was just dominant. Okay, so those both those years, junior and senior year, like I said, he won all the awards, kind of thing. First team all conference, uh, two-time conference player of the year, and his most famous moment was in the 1980 Holiday Bowl. BYU was behind against SMU, Southern Methodist University, who was a powerhouse back then for a few years. BYU was behind 45-25 with 4 minutes left in the game, and they came back to win 46-45 on a last-second Hail Mary thrown by Jim McMahon. So that just cemented his stardom right there. But you can see his career stats: over 9,500 passing yards, not including bowl games, 84 touchdowns. When he left college and went to the pros, he had 70 NCAA records. He was tied for one other record. So he was, as far as prolific college quarterbacks and statistics, he was the most accomplished uh, up to that point in college football history when he graduated in 1981. It was unbelievable. He would go on to have a good pro career as well. Unfortunately, marred too much by injury, but he did win a Super Bowl with the 1985 Chicago Bears. And very smart guy, smart quarterback, crazy guy, loved to have a good time, a little over the top at times, right? But that was Jim McMahon. Not long after Jim McMahon, in fact, the next year, right? Steve Young takes over as quarterback. So you go from Jim McMahon, and you're thinking, well, how's somebody going to fill those shoes, right? 70 records, and all Steve Young does is come from the state of Connecticut. He's a distant relative of Brigham Young, and he goes to BYU, and he is quarterback for 3 seasons. Well, mainly 2 starting, and of course, McMahon was quarterback in 1981, but Young is quarterback in 82 and 83. And as a senior, he's a first team All American, wins the Davy O'Brien and Sammy Baugh Awards. And you can see his career stats there: over 7,700 passing yards, over 1,000 rushing yards, over 8,800 yards of total offense. As a senior, he led the nation in total offense and passing yards, completions, touchdown passes, and completion percentage at 71.3%, which was a new college record, single season record at that time. BYU also set an NCAA record that year for most total offense per game. Steve Young finished second in the Heisman his senior year to Mike Rozier, a running back from Nebraska. And so, I mean, he had a prolific career as well, Steve Young did. Of course, he went on to have a Hall of Fame pro career, one of the great quarterbacks ever in pro football. But Steve Young, a great dual threat quarterback and just an amazing athlete. And so, yeah, you went from McMahon to Young. There was no drop off, right? And BYU continued its just juggernaut offense during those years. And Ty Detmer, where you're thinking, wait a minute here, this is a BYU heavy stretch we're going through. Yeah, it is, right? From McMahon, who set all kinds of records, to Steve Young, who kept it going, and then Ty Detmer was a few years after Steve Young. Detmer started at BYU, started going there in 1987. He really became a star in his junior year in 1990, although he played in 1989 as well. But in 1990 and 91, he just put up numbers that we had never seen before in college football. Records that would stand for quite a few years. And he was just dominant. Detmer grew up in Texas. His dad was a high school football coach. Detmer was not an LDS kid, but he liked BYU's offense, and who wouldn't as a quarterback, right? And he liked how they played, and so he decided to sign on with the Cougars. After he was at BYU for a while, he did convert to the LDS faith, and he just was an incredible quarterback. A little bit undersized, a lot of people would say. 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, just kind of a skinny kid, but he could throw it, and he had enough arm strength to get the job done. He didn't have the strongest arm ever, but he had enough arm strength to get the job done. he was pinpoint accurate, and he was as smart as they come. He could read defenses. He knew where all his receivers' routes should be, and he put the ball there, put it right on the money. He was a two-time consensus All-American as a junior and a senior. And as a junior, he won the Heisman Trophy with over 5,100 passing yards, 41 touchdowns. He finished that season owning 42 NCAA records and tied for 5 others. Also that year, he won the Maxwell Award, and both junior and senior year won the Davey O'Brien Award as best quarterback in the country. You can see that won the UPI Player of the Year as a junior and the Sammy Baugh Award as a senior. And he just was awesome. Okay, he set bowl game records for passing yards and total offense. He was 3-time first team All Conference in the Western Athletic Conference, sophomore through senior year. Led BYU to 3 straight conference championships. And when he graduated, you can see his career stats. 958 completions, over 15,000 passing yards, 121 passing touchdowns. All those, over 14,000 yards of total offense, 162.7 passer rating, which were all records at the time. He finished his career owning 59 college football records and tied for 3 others. So the case could be made that when Ty Detmer graduated, he had then taken over as the most dominant, statistically, quarterback in college football history. He was fantastic. And to top it off, he's just one of the nice, humble guys that you'd ever meet. I was able to talk to him on the phone. I spoke with him a few years back, and I asked him if I called him up. He was still living on his ranch in Texas, and he was coaching high school football at the time. He played in the pros for many years. He had a decade and a half career or so, but he wasn't a starter most of the time. He was usually a backup, but he played played in quite a few games. He was never dominant in the pros. Never really played enough to kind of, I don't think, become that way. But he was so smart that usually during the midweek, the pro teams will have their film sessions, and they will develop a game plan for that coming game's week, or that coming week's game. And he would be the guy, not the offensive coordinator, but Detmer would be the guy to go over the offensive game plan for the week, breaking down the opposing team's defense and so forth. So I mean, he was just he just had a mind for the game. Anyway, I called him up and said, "Hey, this is who I am. I teach a sports history class at a high school, and could we call you up one day, and could the students ask you some questions about your career?" And he was just so nice and so gracious. He says, "Oh, sure, Steve, you call me anytime. Just you just let me know when you want to do it, and call me up, and yeah, we'll talk." And so we called him up during class one day, and the kids asked him some questions, and it was just so cool. And the kids were thrilled, and what a nice, humble guy. So anyway, that's Ty Detmer, one of the good guys in college football history. Peyton Manning, son of Archie Manning. Peyton Manning became the most famous of the Manning family, of course, because of his pro career that was so storied and so accomplished. But played at Tennessee. I told you guys he's kind of spurred Ole Miss, and the Mississippi fans were ticked, right? They thought that he would go there because his dad had gone there, but he went to Tennessee. He led Tennessee to a bowl game in each of his 4 years. So he started as a freshman, which was pretty much unheard of. But Peyton Manning grew up around football. That was his life. Of course, his dad had been in the pros, and as a kid, Peyton would go to the games, and he'd be on the field before games, and from an early age, Peyton learned how to break down defenses and what to look for on a football field. He was just awesome in college. He was first team All SEC as a sophomore, third team All American as a junior, and first team All American and SEC Player of the Year as a senior. As a senior, he swept all the quarterback awards: the Maxwell, the Davey O'Brien, the Johnny Unitas Award. Of course, his jersey, number 16, is retired at the University of Tennessee. And when he finished at Tennessee, he had over 11,000 passing yards, 89 touchdowns, all Tennessee records, right? And he was 39-6 as a starter. He was the SEC record holder for career wins for a lot of years. So he was just awesome. He became the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft um, by the Indianapolis Colts. Would go on to win 2 Super Bowls, right? One with the Colts, and then he went to the Broncos and won one there. So he was just awesome. But Peyton Manning had a tremendous college career, no doubt about it. And you know, uh, he was kind of the golden boy, right? Just big guy, 6'5", 230. He'd get up to the line and look at the defense and might change the play 2 or 3 times. He'd change the play and the defense would adjust and shift, and then he might change it again. And he was in defenses' heads so bad that they never knew what to expect from Peyton Manning. What a accurate quarterback. Um, he put the ball in the money. He was just awesome. And Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow played at Florida. Big kid, 6'3", 236 pounds, strong guy. His career stats are awesome. Okay, over 9,000 passing yards, 88 passing touchdowns, almost 3,000 rushing yards of 57 rushing touchdowns. As a freshman, he didn't play quarterback much, but he'd come in for for a few packages to run the ball close to the goal line or things like that. But as a freshman and a junior, he was on national championship teams. He was the starter by the 2008 season as a junior, and they won the SEC championship both those years as a freshman and junior year. He was a 2-time All-American, first-team All-American as a sophomore and a junior, second-team All-American as a senior, 3-time first-team All-SEC, sophomore through senior year, and he was the AP Player of the Year and the Davey O'Brien Award winner as a sophomore. So as a freshman, they had a different starting quarterback. But like I said, Tebow might come in for a few packages here and there, but as a sophomore, he took over as the starter. So sophomore through senior year, and he won tons of awards. In fact, his sophomore year was topped off by winning the Heisman. He was the first college sophomore to win the Heisman Trophy. And guys had never won the Heisman as a sophomore. One as a junior or a senior, but he won it as a sophomore. And he was sophomore and junior year Maxwell Award winners. He was just great. First college football player to rush and pass for 20 plus TDs in a single season. Okay, he was 3-time team MVP and the only player at Florida to win that award 3 times. That tells you something about how he was respected by his teammates and what they thought of him. He was just a leader on the field. And he left college holding numerous college, NCAA, SEC, and Florida statistical records. And in 2009, Sports Illustrated named him the College Football Player of the Decade. It's hard to argue with that because he was just so great on the field. He was just a winner. And he goes to the pros, and he got criticized a lot. Oh, his arm's not strong enough. He doesn't have what it takes. The thing was, though, when he got a chance to play in the pros, he usually won. And unfortunately for him, his pro career didn't last super long. He just didn't quite get the opportunities, um, and he was out of sports for a while. And then in recent years, he went and played baseball. He was in the minor league affiliate for the Mets, and he was playing pretty well. So what an athlete, though. Great player and great leader.